Oh, hey, it's good to see you again. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of See It Again Cinema. Our episode today is on Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler, which came out in 2008. My guest who has chosen this film is Jesse Eastman.
Hello, that's me.
Yeah. You're the first person I've had on the show who is involved in making film as an actor, a director, as a writer. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your filmography and what you do with film?
I was always a big film fan growing up. Whenever people ask me kind of how I fell in love with film, I always say that it was just neglectful parenting, because I was really exposed to films at a young age that most kids aren't.
Yeah.
I have a very strong memory of watching Pulp Fiction when I was like 7 by myself.
Yeah. Seeing.
And so when people, as I was getting older and really starting to expand film, watching a lot of international films, that was when most of my peers were just getting into, like, there's a typical trajectory for American kids, which is like you get to high school, you start getting into like Christopher Nolan and then Tarantino, and then you start getting into French films usually when you're in college. And so I was just ahead of the curve. So a lot of my friends were just watching these movies that I was like, been watching that since I was a kid. Like, yeah, so I felt like I was a part of some invisible club of people that I just didn't quite know existed. And that was kind of all I thought of film for a long time. It didn't seem very real to me that I could be making them because I didn't know anyone who made them. Yeah. And in Nebraska, there's not like a lot of film happening. And once you find it, you see how vast the landscape is of local film. But when I was high school age, even college age, I did theater, and I was happy doing that. Theater seemed as close as I could get to film. In my heart of hearts, I would have always wanted to just start with film if I knew that was an option. Eventually, film came to me just by chance. A friend of mine was starring in a local film that his friend was directing. They were casting a side character. I was an actor at the time. I don't do as much of that now. And so that was my first time being on a film set. I was 21-ish, so this would have been like 2017. And it was just, the game changed at that point. I immediately was a lot more interested in all the other stuff that was happening. Why is the camera there? They were telling me about the different lens sizes and focal lengths, and I just could not stop focusing on all these other cool things that were new, to the point that the director on many occasions would say, like, okay, now you have to, you see the camera, you see anything wrong with this shot? And it was because I wasn't in it. I'm supposed to be acting. Yeah. So he'd be like, okay, like, you got to go do that, and then after we call cut and we have the scene, then you can come in and ask more questions. So, it was like it felt like as close as I could get to church on a personal level. Yeah. And I've never looked back since. In the last 7 years or so, I've gone on to write, produce, direct many dozens of films, and I had a web series a couple years ago, and that led me to move to Austin, where I live now. Because I'm hoping to expand my career, and Austin is a big film city. Yeah. In the post-viewing discussion, I'm really interested to hear, how does filmmaker brain change rewatching this movie again? Why did you pick this movie for the show? I picked this movie. It was one of the ones I suggested as we were discussing, because it's been on my mind a lot. I've come across it on streaming, and I've almost watched it. I've put it on a list, like on my watch list, and luckily I didn't get to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. But it's something that I, increasingly so over the last year or two, have been wanting to come back to. It's a movie I don't remember that much. I saw it in theater, so that would have been like Oscar season, late 2008. Yep. So yeah, coming up on 16 years for me, and I would have been 11 at the time. I get the feeling that this is not a movie 11-year-olds are prone to enjoy.
I did not see any children at the theater.
It's R, so I had to sneak in. That's one thing. I had to sneak into the theater. So.
You're a rebel with a cause.
I snuck into a lot of R-rated movies when I was a kid. I would buy tickets to one and just go into the other one. This was pre, Dream Lounger, so the seats weren't assigned, which I think has made it a lot harder for people to sneak into movies, which sucks for the younger generation. But
they still do, and they still, I think they're still getting away with it. Hey, keep on dreaming.
Find the movies you want to watch and watch them. There's no such thing as a movie that's too mature for a young audience. If you feel you're ready to watch something, I think you watch it. And this was a movie that, I was a film fan, but I hadn't reached an age where I appreciated longer, more slow kind of moving movies. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did watch some stuff. I watched a lot of, Fincher and the artsy kind of directors that still make mainstream stuff, but most of what I liked at that age was still pretty mainstream. So this was like long, and I remember it just being a little slow and very sad. Mm-hmm. And not to mention, I was not a fan. When you're a teenager, that's probably the prime age to think that like the whole wrestling thing is stupid, because kids like wrestling and some grown-ups like wrestling, but you're such a cynical person when you're a teenager. God forbid people play pretend and do these cool things, but I've become a wrestling fan, so I feel like there's probably some industry things. It is about an aging wrestler, so I think I'll have a point of reference for the character. I'm almost certain that the character is like an amalgamation of famous wrestlers. I remember even at the time kind of equating him to Ric Flair. I think it's supposed to be kind of a, maybe an homage to Ric Flair, or just like wrestlers in general having a hard time when their bodies are not in the same place that their minds are. I think I'll just appreciate it as a big wrestling nerd. And on top of that, I think I have the patience to enjoy a 2.5 hour drama.
Oh, it's only an hour and 50 minutes.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's less than 2 hours.
That proves my point, is that I thought it was really long.
And you know what? There are probably... What I remember is the way that the camera... And this is where it'll be... Do my memories line up with how the film actually plays today's? I remember that there are a good number of somber... still shots that linger on Mickey Rourke's bruised and battered and broken body, but like not for a dramatic moment, but just more of like a, how would you feel if this was the way you made money and your body was in this shape? And I think that I remember the reason I think he was nominated for an actor, besides the Oscars liking a comeback story and ultimately denying it to him, is his acting gave a sense of just like how much he was able to externalize an internal emotion very compellingly.
That's another element that's worth considering. Is I didn't know. I don't think I'd seen any other Mickey Rourke movies at the time. Maybe Sin City, because that came out before.
Yeah.
I loved that as a kid. But I honestly wouldn't have even noticed that it was the same guy, because he looks so different in Sin City.
Oh, yeah.
But now I know about Mickey Rourke's past and how he was kind of always an outsider, and how he was set up to be one of the guys of his generation. And because of being particular about what he chose to do, because of having strong personality, he kind of alienated himself from what could have been a very long, big, successful career. And he's just an immensely talented actor.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the movies that he's in that aren't good, like Iron Man 2, whenever he's on screen, it's like you can't stop looking at what he's doing. He really knows. He has a very good command. So that's not something that would have even been in my mind as an 11-year-old watching this. But now it's like, man, Mickey Rourke, this is considered one of his best performances of his career, if not the best.
Yeah.
So that says a lot now that I've seen his other stuff and I can see how good he is. If this is as good as, those are better, that would say a lot.
I do not remember seeing any 11-year-olds in the theater when I saw it. And this is the only movie I've ever seen in New York City.
Wow.
It's not got a it's not got a New York
what an odd
connection. But so it was like the week before Christmas, 2008, and I was in New York City because my girlfriend at the time was thinking that she wanted to do Teach for America. So we planned this vacation around her audition or, trying out for this program. So we did a lot of the normal things, like trying to go to Carnegie Hall or ice skating at Rockefeller Plaza. The line was way too long. But every Oscar season, I was kind of interested in like, oh yeah, and it wasn't out in Nebraska yet, but it was only playing in New York and LA for Oscar consideration. And when we saw it, we hopped on 3 different subways to get to this theater, and we showed up right after like the opening titles. So I've never even seen the first frames of this film, but it was exciting to try to hop 3 trains or 3 subways to get to this movie that had a lot of Oscar buzz and to see it there. I remember really being impressed by it because it was Aronofsky's first film since The Fountain.
Yes,
which is my personal favorite.
Really?
Yeah.
That's like one of the only ones I don't like.
Oh yeah. Well, maybe we'll bring it back.
Yeah, that's also one I haven't seen more than once. His movies
Yeah.
are not the kind of movies that most people want to watch more than once.
Yeah,
they're very heavy.
And he finds a way to go to some emotional core and tap something. And I think maybe the weirdness of some of his films, and I don't think that this is a particularly strange or like artsy film from what I recall. It seems like a very mainstream drama, sports drama, but he does find a way to cut through to certain emotional states or places.
Yeah,
so,
I agree. I don't know what exactly it is. Maybe it'll be illuminated in this.
Yeah, so...
but yeah, he has this visceral thing.
Yeah.
His stuff just feels more raw somehow.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like vulnerable when you watch it.
And I can see why some people aren't like, hey, let's watch this over and over again.
So I am curious to see how much wrestling there actually is in it. I feel like I remember it starting with the wrestling sequence and then maybe there being another one toward the end. But maybe there's more than I remember.
Yeah.
'Cause I remember feeling like that was part of what kind of annoyed me about it. Even though I did appreciate it, it just felt long. I guess it's not as long as I thought, but I just remember thinking like, it's called The Wrestler.
Yeah.
Is he going to wrestle a lot? So yeah, I remember just feeling like, I don't know, false advertising almost. So I wonder now if that's just a young person being impatient and that there maybe is a lot more than I recall.
Audience expectation really factors a lot into it. And sometimes the marketing of the film, you probably know about that woman who sued the movie studio that made Drive because the trailer made it look like it was going to be a Fast and the Furious movie.
Oh my God.
And it's not that at all. There is actually not that much driving in that.
Barely any. Nicholas Winding Refn is a whole other... You could talk about him for hours. He's a bit of a kook, isn't he? Yeah. I'm curious to see, now that I've seen all of his other stuff, Black Swan did not come out till after this, if I recall. It was like the next one. And I went on to see Requiem for a Dream and Pi, which he started obviously much more experimental, and now he's kind of back. You know, Mother was very odd. So yeah, I have this idea in my head that this is probably his most straightforward movie, and I wonder if that's even true. I wonder if there are elements of it that are less straightforward than I'm remembering, but it does feel almost like a biopic, not necessarily based on one person, but it feels as though he probably interviewed some wrestlers and kind of took stories as inspiration. Yeah, because it feels very straightforward. But maybe it won't be.
Yeah, well, we'll find out. Well, all right. It's time to begin and watch The Wrestler again. We'll catch you after the credits roll. Jesse, are you ready to rumble?
Are you ready to rumble? Really?
Yeah.
Try this. Are you ready to rumble?
See it again, see it again. Cinema, see it again, see it again. Cinema, see it again, see it again. Cinema, see it again, see it again. And then talk about it. And we're back. Wow, man. It's been 16 years since we both seen this movie. What'd you think?
I liked it, just as I thought I would. I appreciated the lore that they tap into a lot more. I understood all of the lingo that they use. It's very, especially in the first, as they're establishing, it's very heavy on the wrestling. It was kind of how I remember there being wrestling in the beginning and then kind of a long period without. But yeah, I just understood kind of what they were talking about more, and I just appreciated it. Also, as somebody who's older in general, I mean, I'm not the age of the character by any means, but I'm more sympathetic to stories about growing older and having to choose between, you know, what you love and your life, so to speak, and how intrinsically tied they can be. You know, what is the point in living if you're not being you, you know? So those kinds of stories just mean more to me as an older person. When I'm young, I'm not really thinking about it in those terms. I'm just like, why is this guy so he's walking around all hurt all the time? Like, is that all this movie is, kind of thing?
This film, like all great sports films, isn't actually about the sport. It's about what the sport represents. And when I think about people who are wrestling with major life issues of, there's this thing that I love, or this is the thing that I'm known for, this is my identity, and I could shed this identity and just go and work at the deli counter at this little grocery store. The reason this film was so popular, and it was a critical and commercial box office hit, is it taps into almost everyone knows what it feels like to have to wrestle with these kinds of issues.
Yeah.
Even if we haven't been physically, whatever, like the emotions behind it all, we've had to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
I agree. 100% agree. I think, we kind of talked about this as we were watching, but there was some really cool parallels between, you know, what is performance? Is he Randy? Or is he Robin? And Randy, like, if Randy is his alter ego, but he doesn't feel much like you know, he doesn't really come off like a person of substance when he's not in his element, when he's doing his thing as Robin, you know, when he's normal, quote unquote normal, when he's interacting with people, he just seems to be drifting through. And so, you know, whether it's his job as a wrestler or not, if that's who he is, then sometimes that's more real than anything. You know what I mean? Especially if you sacrifice, you know, relationships with family members as part of this. If this career and the tumultuous aspects of being a professional wrestler have basically alienated you from loved ones, all the more reason why you want to, you know, double down on that than anything. So yeah, this movie it taps into like identity quite a bit. It
came out right as the Great Recession was really ramping up, and suddenly a whole subset of men who made their living from physical labor suddenly were out of work. Magic Mike is another film that seems to tap into the same idea of having to do things with your body. But Magic Mike basically combines the masculine feelings of like a loss of identity, combining it with the Marissa Tomei, Cassidy, Pam thing. So
it's a good movie in its own right.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of Steven Soderbergh, so
me too.
He's one of my favorite filmmakers.
Yeah, he's so good.
Yeah.
Revisiting this film all these years later, you're older, you know so much more, you've seen so many more films. What stood out to you cinematically?
Yeah, I didn't have a point of reference really, so I didn't even think of it as being as gritty and dirty as it was. You know, my memory of it was that it was like a kind of very polished and very Oscar baity and very, you know, along the lines of like a Benjamin Button kind of thing, where like it's not saying much about anything.
Yeah.
And I didn't even notice how much of the production elements reinforce the themes. So yeah, it was hard for us not to point out some of these things, like it was shot on film, and there's a lot of use of grain and dark colors, and a lot of pretty much consistent movement throughout, whether that's edited in later, the very minor shakes, even on the extreme wide shots. A lot of it's shot in wide, I've noticed, except for in the wrestling segments and in the segments with Marissa Tomei. Pretty much all of it's shot in wide outside of that. And so, yeah, this movement, this camera shake, it's all just, it's got this dirty, grimy quality that I did not remember it having, but it makes perfect sense. It feels documentary-esque in the way it's shot. It feels like someone just was sitting there in his van with him as he was taking his painkillers, just with a camera recording him.
Very, you
it's visceral.
You get the impression you needed, for so much of this film, you only needed a very small crew to get the shots that they did.
But yet the production design, you could tell, was painstakingly specific.
To recreate the vibe of, this is basically the true life story of many wrestlers who keep trying to keep their career going.
100% is. That's part of what I was so curious about, is I wanted to see if there were specific wrestlers that I could find ties to, and there clearly are. But yeah, the general feeling is also that it's a lot more broad in scope. It is really a universal story of going older and people who use their body for their job. And then even just within the wrestling world alone, it can be so many people. So many wrestlers tell the story about how badly they beat their body up when they were young for these fleeting moments.
Or a little bit of
and
cash.
all they're doing is trying to just ride that wave as long as they know they don't have that much longer, but they're willing to endure pain and take painkillers and continue to wrestle because it's so important to them. Because once that's gone, the pain no longer is worth it anymore. It's fine to wrestle through injuries and to cut yourself and to take these painkillers because you're doing it so that you can continue. But once you're done, you don't get there's no light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So it's very bleak in that way.
Yeah, isn't it that just like the artist's life?
Yeah.
That's the way of the artist. When you're talking about the wide shots, a lot of it's shot in wide to where you're like, it seems neutral and objective, even if the camera's always a little unsteady, because his fate, his life is never really rooted in anything. I don't think there's a single static shot in this film.
If there is, they're rare. Maybe during the I could see maybe a few during the wrestling segments, but it would be quick.
I think it was probably when he's doing his signature move of the Ram Jam, and contrast between the close editing that's quick and then the wide shots. Not only do I think it works for the audience to be like, oh my gosh, it makes the action seem so much more visceral and real, and it really does look like real violence, and they're suffering real injuries. I think it also highlights the rush that the people who are willing to subject themselves to this pain it shows why that seems so much more preferable than being in this fluorescently brightly lit
the scenes at the deli counter are very clinical, and they, even though those are really some of the only scenes where he's in the real world, because he's either wrestling or in that strip club with the woman he loves. There are very few scenes. There's a quick one in the hospital, but all of those scenes are shot in such a undesirable way. None of them are made to look pretty at all, and yet they almost feel like dreams. Instead of feeling like, oh my god, he's in reality, this is what his life is like. He probably views his life as being these moments when he's wrestling, and he views these other moments as almost fake. It's like he's in a liminal space psychologically. He's just kind of there until he can get back to his real normal. So they kind of flip it on its head and make them look so unsignificant. Those scenes feel so normal looking. That in the grand scope compared to the rest, they come off very weird and depressing.
The scene where he goes just to watch the match with the athlete who you're like,
R-Truth, he's a real wrestler.
There's this scene. When I see that, I see on his face this longing of that should be me in the ring. I should be on there. And in the mid to late 2000s, like I'm talking about like 2004 to 2009, that was a 5-year gap where I was not playing music. I was not in a band. I was not performing on stage. I wasn't really recording much music. And it got to where I couldn't enjoy going to concerts. I try to do ancillary things like record demos for bands, be a sound like the bouncer at a music venue. I wasn't exactly the most intimidating bouncer, but I was the door guy.
You're tall, so that helps.
Yeah, but now maybe if I had muscles like Mickey Rourke, I would be the sound guy, the sound tech.
Yeah, you wanted to be adjacent. You needed to be a part of it in some way. You needed to have a presence.
Yeah, and at one point, I was doing sound at a good music venue. I looked around, I looked on stage, I looked at the band, and the band on stage the crowd was into it, but the band was not that good. And I was like, I think I could do better than this. I looked around, and I was like, you know what? No one ever wants to fuck the sound guy. I was like being on stage is where the action is. Mm-hmm. The sound techs are very important. They make the band sound good. But it's not the most glamorous. No, in some ways, it's often a thankless job. But there's not much glory in it. When I see Mickey Rourke's face, and I saw and related to his feeling, and I can't help but think that seeing that movie and tapping into that melancholia and that aching and longing that the Ram has for being in the ring, that relationship ended shortly afterwards, and I was so heartbroken I decided to put the band back together. And starting in the couple months after that, we like less than 5 months after the relationship ended, we reunited for one night. Those moments on stage, I think, feel more real than real life, the pedestrian life. One thing that I love about this film is its depiction of wrestling culture, and that the only person who really gives Randy a hard time and makes jokes and tries to take him back and make him sound like what he's doing is not a valid use of his time. Like, oh, the weekends, isn't that when you're normally sitting on other guys' faces? Mm-hmm. Is from his shitty manager, his store manager, who, if you had a choice between being in the ring or being the manager of the Acme grocery store, I'd choose being in the ring any day. That guy clearly hates his life. He's watching porn in the office.
Even more telling is the reverence with which people have and treat Ram. Whenever his matches are over, he only has a few matches during the course of the movie, but when he walks into a dressing room, the wrestlers are always super happy for him, super proud. He has this place of stature. Mm-hmm. Even though his time is kind of passed in the limelight, he's holding on to the stature that it has. He wants to be around his people, because when he's in the real world, he's just an asshole working at a deli, and nobody understands. Yeah. And I can totally understand that. It's like I get very weird if I go long periods without being around other filmmakers. Mm-hmm. At my day job, I often am like, what can I talk to these people about? They don't understand that when I leave here, I'm kind of the shit, you know what I mean? Like, I write my own movies and I make my own movies, and when I'm on set, people treat me like I'm important, and even though I don't need to be important all the time, that's a part of me that these people just are not aware of. Yeah. You know what I mean? And if they were, would that affect how nice they are to me? It's hard not to go there mentally. So, and I'm not even I do some acting, but most of what I do is writing and directing and behind camera things. So if I were mainly an actor, it would probably be magnified. Yeah. Because that's me, that's my face, that's, it's much more presentational. Speaking of acting, as a film actor, and you've done acting on the stage, what do you
like or notice or appreciate or, you know, anything about Mickey Rourke's performance? Like,
Mickey Rourke is very subtle in all the best ways. He never feels like he's trying to get to a certain place. I've read about him and that he's kind of an older method kind of guy, so he gets very immersed in the culture, and for the most part he is essentially just feeling those things. You know, he's not really acting as much as maybe other people might be. So yeah, his performance is subdued, isn't accurate, but everything just feels easy and natural. Doesn't really feel like he's acting. And not that Marissa Tomei is a bad actress, she's also phenomenal in it, but the difference is you can tell that she's acting. She's doing a very good job of acting. I totally believe what she's doing, but it doesn't feel like she's a stripper.
Yeah.
She feels more like Marissa Tomei than he does like Mickey Rourke. In the movie, when you're watching it, I wouldn't, it feels documentary-esque, it feels like he is the Ram.
Yeah. It wasn't until the final fight scene when you're like, how long is this going to go on before he has a heart attack, and that tension, and how long can he keep it? Like, there's one moment where I'm like, God, how many of these stunts did he do himself? And I just thought, you know what? Like, there's something I just believe, and I know that they had stunt people.
Sure.
Like, you don't do a movie on this budget with this star, with this, like with financial stake without. But, and it just made me realize, like, man, for not a single frame of this movie did I not believe that. Like, the illusion was pulled off. I believe Mickey Rourke was... I was thinking the
same thing in an earlier match. The one where he's wrestling the guy with the mohawk.
Yeah.
I think that's the first full match we actually see. I remember thinking during a lot of that it was him. If you look closely, you can tell when it's somebody else during, like, the acrobatic stuff.
Yeah.
But during all the stuff in the ring, it clearly was him for a lot of it, for the stuff that was deemed safe by, producers and stuff.
Yeah.
The acting was all good. Evan Rachel Wood, I don't know if it's just that storyline not quite blending with the themes of the movie as strongly. But I mentioned her first scene felt wonky to me. It felt very trite. The way that she chose to articulate her being mad. But they really did recover with her later.
Yeah.
She's also good. She's younger in that. She hadn't developed as much as an actress. So I would say of the three, she stands out as being the weakest. But all of the main three characters, I would say Marissa Tomei, her, and Mickey Rourke are the three main characters.
Yeah.
They're all good. They're all very above average. The screenplay, oddly enough, is probably the weakest element. The writing is good, but compared to the acting, the production design, the cinematography, the story, the narrative is fantastic. I think the execution within the dialogue is sometimes the only major notable spot that doesn't quite land.
Yeah. What movies would you recommend someone see if they love this film?
I would say the more realistic fictional movies. So I'm also a huge fan of The Social Network. I say that's a big one. It's very different in that it's not gritty or grimy at all. It's got that Fincher smoothness to every shot, but it feels very real and you're immersed in it. Similarly, Dumb Money, which is a newer movie.
Oh yeah, about the GameStop.
Thing. That's shot very plainly and very naturally, and it's got this very down-to-earth aspect to it. Everybody feels very real. These are obviously all based on semi-real, they're based on books or semi-real things. But stuff like that, maybe a biopicture. This has a very biopic quality, even though it's technically not one.
Yeah.
So seek out some biopics, perhaps.
I was rooting for Mickey Rourke to win the Oscar for this. And then he lost to Sean Penn in Milk at the Oscars
that tough year.
And this was a couple years after Heath Ledger lost as Ennis Del Mar to Truman Capote, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Both phenomenal performances. And those two Oscar races for acting, and I know people like there are all these issues with the Oscars, but what it highlighted to me was this division in what counts for good, or like what deserves to be awarded for acting. And I saw the bias that the Academy seems to have for mimicry, for rewarding the actor that comes the closest to mimicking a real life person versus a character who is playing a fictional character.
They do love. I mean, Rami Malek just won a few years ago, and he was phenomenal as Freddie Mercury, but he didn't even sing the songs. And yet, even though the movies I think are of similar quality, a year or two later, Taron Egerton played Elton John to much better effect. He was more accurate. He sang the songs himself, and he didn't get any Oscar buzz.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind for people who love mimicry so much and playing real life characters. Yeah, Taron Egerton got as good as you can get playing a musician, and nobody seemed to notice at all, which is it's very inconsistent as well.
Yeah, and I know that there are all kinds of reasons for why the Academy does that. It's made me think that they should eliminate the gender of the categories and keep the same number of categories for the main lead, but have best acting performance in a fictional role, best acting performance in a biographical role.
Sure. Yeah.
And then just let all the actors compete for that, so that we could see.
I agree. I think there should be more acting. I think there should be, at this point, there should be best acting performance in a CGI movie, because that's a whole different type of acting when you're acting without the. And it's hard to do. I generally don't like those movies as much, but the acting is hard to do when you're looking at a tennis ball.
Yeah.
You know, or if you're doing motion capture.
Yeah.
I think you could probably group motion capture and CGI together, but like best acting in a technically driven narrative. You know, I don't know how they phrase it, but like those movies are not the same as Sling Blade or, you know, Mystic River, where, you know,
leave him alone.
You know, those are very raw. Mystic River also might not be a bad movie for people who like The Wrestler, because it has got this grimy, dirty, depressing quality. It also, if I recall, Mystic River is a period piece. It bounces between the past and the present. Yeah. Early 2000s. 2003 maybe.
It was 2003 because it was up against Return of the King at the Oscars.
It has a very similar, like, you know, the Iraq War is, people are aware of it. There's even a subtle mention of it in The Wrestler about the Call of Duty game with Iraq. So
and all the American flags.
Flags everywhere. You go, you know, it's a very common thing in wrestling. It's honestly one of the few wrestling tropes that I really don't like having come up even nowadays, but it's very still common for the heel, the villain character, if they're of any kind of all-American looking nationality, a lot of times they like demonize that, you know, WWE, who, you know, I wouldn't recommend people watch, honestly. They're notorious over their, you know, 50 years of being around for making the bad guys brown people. And it always becomes, and especially in the 80s, which is funny that the Ram in the movie is so obsessed with the 80s when he was at his height. Yeah. But in the 80s, wrestling culture, because of the Cold War and like post-Vietnam, everything was so patriotic. So anytime the good guy was like an All-American and the villain was anything else, you know, Mexican, Middle Eastern, it was always like USA versus whoever. And it becomes very like, you know...
problematic.
Very like pro-America.
Jingoist.
But yeah, you get that jingoistic. That's very... You can't tell the history of wrestling without that jingoistic, thing. But you definitely get this sort of, you know, early 2000s pessimism. You know, financially the world's in a bad place. You get that in Mystic River too. Yeah. So I would say, that's not a bad one.
What I thought was really interesting is that until the final scene, Mickey Rourke's character, you know, the Ram, never actually talks or addresses the audience.
Yeah.
Never does like hype stuff. It's all about the physical aspect of it, not what he's saying to his opponent in a kind of like egging them on or like, you know, riling them up. But then the final time on stage that he gets the mic,
Yeah, he cuts a promo.
it to me it had certain layers to it, where I was like feeling like this had a on the waterfront Marlon Brando, like it could have been a contender thing.
Sure.
But then, because Mickey Rourke was kind of expected to be the next Marlon Brando.
He was. That's what I was kind of getting at before. He was painted as being a Marlon Brando of his generation, of the early 80s and onward.
His trajectory didn't go that way, and it's sometimes it seems like he was ostracized or punished for certain choices he made. But I think it's really interesting that in that moment, like that speech is working on several levels. That meta Marlon Brando thing. Also, it's like Mickey Rourke bearing his soul basically to the audience, like, hey, I'm still standing, which to me called back to Jake LaMotta and Raging Bull. And he's like, never got me down, Ray. Yeah. Never got me down.
What it feels like to me is he's giving his own eulogy.
Yeah.
It feels like he knows that he might die in that ring. He's willing to, but he's not going to say that to them.
Yeah, because that would be a bummer.
Yeah.
Why would he bring his audience down?
He's almost saying the opposite of what's true. He's saying, I'm not going to leave unless you guys make me, because he knows that that's what they want to hear.
Yeah.
But it's almost the furthest thing from the truth. He knows that he's either going to be done, or whether he retires, or if his last breath is in that ring.
Yeah.
But you don't say that to an audience that's about to watch you wrestle.
Yeah.
So he takes that energy, the meaning of, you know, we know the significance of him choosing to wrestle after he's been told not to, and yet he says the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it feels very eulogistic to me.
Yeah, and I have to say I'm here for it. Like, one of my bands is called Dude Won't Die.
Yeah.
And it's not about the patriarchy. It's about the idea of being the dude. It's also about, and anyone can be a dude. I'm a dude. She's a dude. You're a dude. Like, we're all dudes. Which is another way of just saying we're all human. But it's also about the slang term. Like, dude won't die. Like, cool is it's not like cowabunga or bodacious or like radical. Mm-hmm. It's a term, tubular. Like, cool, ever since Miles Davis's Birth of the Cool, has meant, hey man, that's pretty cool. Yeah. At no point, if someone says, dude, you're pretty cool, I dig your style, at no point has that ever been out of fashion or...
Agreed.
Which I love the word hip, because for a while I was like, hey man, that's pretty hip. For a while, calling something hip was not hip to call someone hip.
That's ironic.
But, you know, that's a digression that's probably going to end up on the cutting room floor, metaphorically. There is no cutting room.
It's, to the movie, it is also like a litmus test for how pessimistic someone is, mm-hmm. whether they view the hard cut at the end after he jumps, as like... Did he die, or is his story end when the ram ends? Does he, you know, he might end up back in the hospital. He might be, you know, he might have just escaped it, and you know, it obviously was hurting him during that last match, but they don't do anything to indicate necessarily that he died specifically. So perhaps he got up out of that match. That was his last match. He got to be happy with Pam. Mm-hmm. They don't give you any indication. So I think what you believe happens immediately after that cut will tell you a lot about the person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And obviously it's more metaphorical. It's not meant to be literal, like, you know. But I read it as, you know, his life is essentially over when he's not the Ram.
Well, and regardless of if he lives or dies, that is... probably the last time he will ever compete in the ring.
Agreed.
And so why not end the story there? It's a dramatic finish. I love it, and I'm probably gonna not wait 16 years to watch.
Yeah, I don't think I will either.
Like,
it's sad. It's hard to. It's not the easiest movie to watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good enough on its merits of its acting, and again, as a wrestling fan in particular, there's so much cool wrestling things happening. The way that the wrestling scenes are shot is very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels very authentic to that culture. We didn't really get into Aronofsky's religious views and the way he imbues certain ideas about humans' relationship to the divine and existence. I don't know actually a lot about what he actually thinks, but rewatching this film again, it was interesting when they talked about the sacrificial ram rather than the sacrificial lamb.
Oh, she makes the joke, the pun, sacrificial ram,
and
sacrificial lamb. There are some moments that he stands up and he's
Christ-like.
Like Christ-like.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah. I did notice that Aronofsky has a lot of religious themes in his movies. I didn't know that it was... I guess it makes sense. People like Scorsese do the same thing.
Yeah.
Catholicism is in like every Scorsese movie just about. But yeah, I didn't realize it was... that because if he was religious or not. I know he's preoccupied by it though.
Yeah, and it's something that I know I would dive into if I saw some, I'll watch some video essays, I'll read some film studies, some blogs on filmschoolrejects.com. It's an interesting film, and I feel overall yeah.
I do too. I think I gave it, when we were texting about it, I gave it like a 6.5.
Yeah.
From my initial view.
When you were 11?
Yeah, having appreciated it, but not necessarily remembering a lot of it, and appreciating aspects that, I know to be true about it, but my experience being a little bit boring, I would easily bump my score up to like an 8.5 to 9.
Nice.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's something I need to rewatch for sure. Again, very soon, just to kind of because a lot of it I was in my head. Given what the podcast is, I was thinking a lot of I didn't remember that, or here are all these ways in which it's changed. So now I need to look at it again, having gotten that part out of my system, just as a movie, and really see some of these other aspects. There is something I'm kind of working through in my head already of just which I kind of keep coming back to, is that like he's almost always in like dark rooms. There's this whole performative aspect with her being a stripper and him being a wrestler. There are all these, they're so similar to each other, and that's partially why that's probably why she's drawn to him in the first place. At the very beginning of the movie, it's clear.
Recognized game.
It's very clear that they have a bond in that first scene they're together, even though he loses her that money and she's kind of mad at him. She also forgives him very quickly. She has a soft spot for him because she probably, really relates to what he's going through, having to put his body on the line. And she's also... There are a lot of shots of her. There's a whole scene where we just follow her when he's not even there at the strip club, where she's like going around asking people if they want lap dances, and she's feeling not sexy. She's feeling very insecure because she's getting older and she doesn't want to be a stripper anymore. Yeah. And that also parallels him aging out of being able to wrestle. I mean, it's different reasons. He doesn't want to leave wrestling. He just knows he has to. And in her case, she wants to leave stripping. But it's similar. They're both getting too old, and they're both becoming disenchanted, Wrestling hurts him physically. Being a stripper hurts her emotionally. Yeah. So with another watch, I'll really be able to hone in on kind of some of these themes that that are clear to me, but not super clear.
And I knew that a lot of people made the connection between professional wrestling and professional ballet, and that like Black Swan is the feminine side to this body performance world, where like a lot of damage is done to the performer's body and minds, and in order to really succeed at a high level. But rewatching this film has made me realize that Cassidy / Pam's character is a flip side to Natalie Portman's Black Swan character. So
I have to rewatch Black Swan. We're gonna do an Aronofsky thing now,
yeah,
so maybe that would be the part 2 of this.
Yeah, that would be great.
Flip side.
Yeah, and then next time you're back, or sometime, I think you gotta give The Fountain another view.
I'm going to.
That's my personal favorite.
Also, Pam is Ram.
Pam is Ram.
Pam and Ram. Pam is her real name. Ram is his, but it's his gimmick name.
Yeah.
But he feels more like Ram. He asks her what she wants to be called. She said Pam. So she has like this rejection of her stripper name. She is Pam.
Yeah.
He is Ram. So they're similar and yet different.
But they both drive Rams.
And they both drive Rams, which I think was probably just like
a funny
thing.
Because most audiences aren't actually gonna notice the stuff in the background.
But like it is interesting. Pam Ram. That's clearly not an accident.
No.
But the fact that it's, him choosing to identify with his non-given name.
Yeah.
And her choosing, in moments where she's not at work.
Yeah.
Preferring to be called Pam. That just goes to show you where they view themselves with their identities.
Yeah. I also think Robin just is like, wouldn't everyone prefer to be Batman rather than Robin?
Yeah. Robin was also a very clever choice because it's vaguely effeminate. It's a gender neutral name, but it has a feminine connotation.
Yeah.
And he's such a masculine presenting, he's a wrestler. So of course he wouldn't want to be called Robin. Yeah. Robin is like, sissy kind of, so to speak.
Yeah. No. I mean, that's definitely, I think, the connotation that the filmmakers were drawing upon. So any last comments about The Wrestler?
If you haven't seen The Wrestler, it's worth watching. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, it's a very human story. It's sad, though. And then if you are like me and you haven't watched it in a long time, if anyone watching is in my general age group, late 20s, early 30s, and you haven't watched it since you were a teenager, you will probably appreciate it more just as somebody who's getting older. There's a lot to explore with it, so I'm personally glad that we watched it, and I recommend it.
Well, all right. That'll do it for this episode of See It Again Cinema, where old movies make magical new memories. Thanks for rewatching. We'll see you next time. Ram jam, ram jam, ram jam, ram jam, ram jam, ram jam, ram jam.